بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, tonight inshallah we are now in the night of the 9th of al-Hijja, now that we've prayed Maghrib, and we go home tonight after Isha and hopefully get to bed a little bit early so that we can get up at 3 in the morning for suhoor, for fasting on the day of Arafah, inshallah. And tonight we're going to cover just one of the divine names. For the past few weeks, we've been covering two, but tonight we just cover one. And we are covering the name al-Latif. Al-Latif. And the name al-Latif is sometimes translated as the Benevolent, and sometimes is translated as the subtly kind. Not just the kind, but in a way that is subtle. And we'll explore this, inshallah, looking at the linguistic meaning of this and its connections in the Quran and elsewhere. When you go into the Arabic dictionaries and you look in the root of lam, ta, and fa, you find lots of different words that derive from these three letters. You find words such as kindness, one who is kind, or one who is friendly. It also indicates mitigating something, meaning subtle means of protection, or to alleviate, to remove distress and difficulties. Something that is moderate. Temper as in lessen something that's intense. Lesson, benevolent. We also find the meanings of graceful, of subtle, mild, and soft. We also find meanings such as ease, when you ease something, or you soothe something, or allay someone's fears or worries, or alleviate a difficulty, or to bestow kindly. Because you can give and be a little rough with it, or you can give kindly, is to give kindly. And it also indicates doing something in a covert way. Doing something in a covert, subtle way. And if you think of the example of giving, there's overt giving, and then there's covert giving. Overt giving would be someone pulling out their wallet in front of you and everyone else and pulling out a wad of cash and putting it in your hand. That's very overt because you see it and everyone sees it. A more subtle way would be someone who, I don't know, let's say they slip an envelope through your mail slot in the middle of the night and you have no idea who it is, and it came in a very subtle way. That's an indication. So we look at the roots and we find that this word lutf indicates kindness, benevolence, friendliness, gentleness, mildness, delicateness, and refinement. If someone is latif, it indicates all of these things. It can also indicate that they're very refined, very subtle, they're very gentle, very benevolent. All of these meanings are there in the root of lam, ta, and fa for lutf, and Allah is al-Latif. So this is very obviously one of the names of Jamal, one of the names indicating divine beauty. And this is one of the names that scholars, mashayikh, unconditionally recommend people to invoke in dhikr with unlimited numbers, because it's a special way of invoking Allah, and it's gentle acting, and it's very effective when a person is going through stress financial difficulties, problems in life. And we're in a time of intensity. We're in a time of turmoil and trial and tribulation. And this is one of the names of Allah Ta'ala that one should invoke frequently in these trying times. Ya Latif, Ya Latif, Ya Latif. So looking at the meanings of this name al-Latif, we go back, as we always do, to that commentary by Sheikh Ahmad ibn Ajiba al-Hasani rahimahullah. He says in his commentary that it is said that al-Latif means the ineffable. What does ineffable mean? It means the one who is beyond comprehension. And that would indicate tanzih, or divine transcendence. Or it means the one who has full knowledge of all hidden things. So that hiddenness aspect in the linguistic meaning is there. But he's saying that in one interpretation, it refers to Allah's absolute encompassing knowledge of all things, of all hidden things. It's also said that al-Latif means the one who bestows his grace by providing favors and benefits to others from indiscernible and inconceivable doors. So these are graces from Allah that come to a person, but they're coming through means that are not easy to discern. They come in very subtle, unexpected ways. And he says that all three of these explanations are correct. Each one is touching on a certain aspect of the meaning of the name al-Latif. Now, when you look at these three, it's important to understand what they're each referring to. The first one is referring to Allah's attribute of transcendence, tanzih. And this is why he says that the first meaning refers to a negating attribute, meaning Allah is beyond all compare. And this is similar in meaning to the name as-Salam or al-Quddus or as-Subuh and so on. He says the second meaning refers to Allah's knowledge. So we know al-Alim, and this is referring to Allah's knowledge of hidden things. And the third meaning refers to an attribute of action, meaning Allah's act of bestowing gently, kindly, subtly, benevolently, through indiscernible and imperceptible means, very subtle means. So these are the various ways you can look at the meaning of this name. And we've said this many times before, sometimes you get different interpretations. And some interpretations of some matters, it really is a question of one being right and one being wrong. But this is not one of those. These are all correct interpretations, but they're all looking at the name from a particular vantage point. If you look at the name al-Latif as it reflects the actions of God, then it means the one who is subtly kind in how he bestows ease, kindness, and grace upon his servants. If you're looking at al-Latif from the vantage point of Allah's knowledge, then it means the one whose knowledge encompasses all subtle and hidden things. And if you're looking at the name al-Latif as it points to the divine essence, it is the one who is ineffable, very similar to the meaning of as-Salam and al-Quddus and these other names of divine transcendence. So we just summarized it right there. All three are there together. The ineffable means the one who's free of all imperfections. That's tanzih. So this is a negating attribute, it's negating imperfections. And when you say that al-Latif means the one who has knowledge of all hidden things, this is the attribute of Allah's knowledge. And when you say that al-Latif means the one who bestows his grace subtly, that is an attribute of divine action. Now, one of the things that Ibn Ajiba does very often in his commentary, and also Sheikh Ahmed Zarruq, is they talk about what the person would be like if their knowledge of the names went beyond the intellect and went to the heart. of truly knowing Allah by that name. How would that transform the person? How would they be different than just knowing it in their minds? And so he says that the one who knows that Allah is al-Latif, as in the ineffable, the one who is beyond all imperfection, that person will magnify and revere him to the degree that such knowledge is firmly rooted within the heart. And the one who knows that Allah, al-Latif, has full knowledge of all hidden things, will be guarded in his actions because his actions are subtle or hidden. Allah knows them all. Knowing that Allah is constantly observing him and what he's doing, and he'll also be wary of relying on his personal knowledge or state. Basically, how does that translate into action? And if you know Allah is all-knowing, what does that mean for how we behave? Right? We know it here, but sometimes we behave in ways as if we don't really believe that. That's because it has not gone from here to here, or it is here, but it gets covered by shahawat, desires, and ego. And lastly, he says, the one who knows that Allah al-Latif is the bestower of grace, who supplies benefit, he will turn resolutely to him and will rely upon none but him. If you really know that Allah bestows subtly, how would you trust in other than him to do that when other things are dependent upon him for whatever Allah gives them as well? That's how it would look. Now, one of the works that we have not yet cited since beginning this program is the work of al-Imam al-Zajjaj. Al-Imam al-Zajjaj is a very early authority in the Arabic language. He was an Arabist, and he has a very short commentary on the divine names. Most of his commentary looks at the linguistic meaning of the names. And so, because him being a master of the Arabic language and focused on Arabic words, he talks mostly about the root meanings and their derived meanings. And most often, I'm not really quoting from him because anything that he has said, it's been said later on, perhaps in more detail. But sometimes he says things that others don't say in exactly the same way. When he talks about the name al-Latif in this very early work in Islamic history, he says, in describing Allah, the name al-Latif signifies that he is benevolent to his servants in concealment and covering where they are unaware, and provides for them means of livelihood from where they do not expect. So notice that he's talking about two things here. He's talking about Allah as al-Latif, whose lutf is in concealment and covering. Just think about how many things Allah Ta'ala is concealing and covering about each of us individually. I don't mean, skeletons in the closet or anything like that, although that's there too. I'm talking about even more obvious things, like bodily functions, what's going on inside, emotions. Like, would you really want to have everyone know exactly what you're feeling at every moment of the day? I wouldn't, because we go through ups and downs, and you have those compartments in your life where you may lose your temper or you lose patience, but Allah conceals you. So there's a lutf in Allah covering us, covering our faults. Because imagine if Allah exposed every single person for all of the faults that they have. Some of the Salaf would say, if people knew what was really in me, then my sins and my shortcomings, no one would be able to stand around me. And they said, if sins produced a smell, no one could be around me. I would be stinking so badly. But Allah is Latif, and He covers those things to give us a chance to live an honorable life and to catch up and to make tawbah and to hopefully remove those bad qualities and replace them with good qualities. So there's lutf in that concealment. He also says from the lutf of Allah Ta'ala is the fact that He provides for them means of livelihood from where they do not expect. And sometimes that's in very simple, ordinary ways where a person makes a connection they wouldn't have otherwise made, and one thing leads to the other, and now they have some opportunity they would have never thought of before. At other times, it's more miraculous, right? It can happen in so many ways, but it's all from Allah's lutf. So we should look at how the lutf of al-Latif manifests. We talk about these names of Allah Ta'ala, and we always say that tahaqquq, or that level of realization, is really understanding experientially how the meanings of those names manifest and witnessing the manifestation of the effects of those names. So when a person experiences divine rahmah in their life, they're experiencing a manifestation of the effect of ar-Rahman. When they are forgiven, they're experiencing Allah's maghfirah, His forgiveness, and so on. So what about the manifestations of divine gentleness, benevolence, and ease? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for instance, when Allah ta'ala facilitates the path of goodness for someone and gives them tawfiq, gives them that enabling grace, He has shown lutf, subtle kindness to that person. And when Allah wards off evil from a person and harm, He's also shown them lutf. So there's lutf, divine gentleness and ease, in facilitating the straight path and also averting us from the false paths, averting us from evil. You know, we don't really recognize how many times we could have been in some horrible accident because Allah is so latif that He averts it from us and we won't even notice it. Like, it's obvious if you're driving in your car and you almost get into a head-on collision, and just at the right moment you turn the car a certain way and you avoid a head-on collision. It's very obvious in that moment. Ya Latif, it could have been really bad. But how many times has it happened that Allah has averted evil from us and we didn't even notice it was coming? And we may not even notice that it had come into our area of life until later, if at all, right? How many times have we avoided deadly accidents and we'll never know it? How many times have we avoided turning here or turning there or moving here or moving there, where going in that direction would have led to a catastrophe we don't even recognize? So when Allah averts evil, subtly or not so subtly, this is Allah's gentleness and kindness towards us. And when Allah guides us from the darkness of ignorance or disbelief or blameworthy innovations and sins to the light of knowledge, faith, and obedience, He's also shown lutf to us, subtle kindness. You can look at the lutf of Allah in so many ways. Other manifestations are the ease and facilitation that are made for obedience and good works. Allah has facilitated for each and every one of us to be here right now. You could have been anywhere. You could have been out in the nightclubs. But Allah chose to bring you here to the house of Allah. Allah put in your heart a desire to seek His pleasure, to pray in one of His houses, to invoke Him, to seek His mercy, and to seek knowledge of Him. That is Allah's lutf, because no one should ever think that, oh, I'm here because of my strength. I'm here because of my determination. I'm here because I'm just this super pious person. No, you're here because Allah brought you here. And if Allah did not bring us here, we would be somewhere else, and it could be really bad. Another form of lutf is the fact that Allah Ta'ala safeguards tawheed within our hearts. He safeguards that belief, makes it firm, and shows us His signs, and we recognize those signs around us. That's His lutf. It's from His lutf that He unveils certain realities within our hearts, certain realizations that dawn upon our hearts about the reality of this world, or certain meanings of the Quran, or certain aspects that enliven our faith. That's from Allah's lutf. A lot of these things come suddenly. Likewise, from Allah's lutf is the protection of one's beliefs from shubuhat and shukuk, misgivings and doubts. There are a lot of Muslims who have very strange misgivings, doubts, and misunderstandings about Islam. Sometimes they keep silent and they never say anything about them. If they seek the answers, then that's good for them. That means they're looking to find an answer, but many of them never get answers. Or they seek the answers in the wrong places. And they never address these doubts, and they fester and grow over time until ultimately their faith is eroded. So it is from Allah's lutf that Allah gives one clarity about who He is, and who His Prophet is, and what this deen is about, and what are our ethics and values, and what is from the thawabit, the constants of the deen, and what is something open to interpretation and ijtihad. Having clarity about how Islam works, all of that is from the lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is likewise from Allah's lutf that Allah protects the hearts and keeps them safe from fitna that tries them in their deen. Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran, for those who believe, Allah makes them firm with a firm word in this life and the next. يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ. And that firm word is La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. To have that firmness that remains until the end of life, until the person leaves this dunya, hopefully uttering La ilaha illallah. That's all from Allah's lutf. It's from His gentle kindness, His benevolence. Walhamdulillahi ala dharik. Now Imam al-Ghazali had some really beautiful things to say about this name as well. In his commentary on the 99 names, Al-Maqsad al-Asna, he says, one is deserving of this name, Latif, if one knows the subtleties of those things which are beneficial, as well as their hidden aspects, along with what is subtle about them and what is benevolent. Moreover, in conveying them to those who are deserving, he is committed to the path of gentleness rather than harshness. If you understand this, you can start to get an understanding of what it means to cultivate that meaning in your character, which we haven't gotten to yet, which is that if you want to cultivate lutf, is you have to be a giving person, but the giving is not enough. It has to be giving with lutf. You can't be a generous person and pull out cash and shove it in someone's face. That's not latif at all. You have to be dignified and refined and subtle about how you do these things to save that person's honor and self-dignity, right? If you have some beneficial knowledge to impart to your family or community, you have to convey it in a way that is hopefully refined and that is digestible in a way that they will receive openly. And we see the opposite of this a lot, right? Where a person, they think they know something, and they, in the guise of nasiha, it's like the harshest thing ever. It's like, ittaqillah, I'm giving you nasiha, And we used to joke about this years ago. We used to call it the passive-aggressive dua, where the person tries to give you nasiha as a way to basically assert their dominance over you. And they'll say, this, barakallahu feek. And they say it was, And if you translate that into English in the same tone, it sounds so strange. May Allah bless you, but not may Allah bless you, but may Allah bless you. It doesn't sound very subtle, does it? So subtleness in how you convey knowledge is a part of cultivating that. So he says the perfect meaning of benevolent combines gentleness in action with delicacy of perception. So a part of that subtlety is knowing for us what to give someone, how to give it, when to give it, in what way, and to be very subtle with it such that it leaves the best impression, right? That's what it looks like. Imam al-Ghazali continues and says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wise insofar as He plans things. And we say plan here, we mean tadbir. Generous insofar as He creates them. He is the fashioner insofar as He orders them. Just insofar as He puts each thing in its proper place. And benevolent insofar as He does not overlook subtleties and qualities of gentleness concerning them. An example of the way He is benevolent towards His servants is His giving them more than they need and His demanding of them less than they are capable of. So Allah gives us more than we need, and He asks us in return less than what we're actually capable. We could do more, but Allah demands less than what we're actually capable of. So there is lutf in this. He's not giving less than what we need, and He's not asking from us more than what we can do. It's the opposite. He says it also pertains to His being benevolent to facilitate their attaining the happiness of eternity with little effort in a short time, that is, a lifetime, for there is no way of comparing that with eternity. You ever think about eternity? Think about it. A person from the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ is honored on the Day of Judgment to drink from the hawd, the basin of the water that is whiter than milk and sweeter than honey, the basin that is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ where his ummah gathers. And in the description of that hawd, the Prophet ﷺ says, the one who drinks from it, لا يظمأ بعده أبدا. That person will never feel thirsty ever again. So imagine a person is sitting in Jannah. You could say, let's give a number. Let's say 480 trillion years of time has elapsed. And they're just in Jannah, enjoying Jannah. And someone says, hey, are you thirsty? Oh, I'm thirsty. I drank from the hawd 438 trillion years ago. I'm not thirsty. But they still drink. But they drink for enjoyment, not for thirst. And you all know the difference. When you're outside, you're working in the hot sun, and you come home and you drink something and you're just gulping it down because you're so thirsty. You feel dehydrated almost. That's a kind of thirst. You're quenching a craving for hydration, for water. But then you have that drink that, you're not thirsty. You're just walking by the kitchen and you open the fridge and you see that juice that was so good. And you pour yourself a glass, not because you're thirsty, but because you like the taste of it. So, no, exactly. So a person is drinking in Jannah not because of thirst, right? So Allah Ta'ala is giving people eternity. What is it? It's hard. You can't wrap your mind around eternity. We're finite beings here, live 80 years, 90 years, 100 years. In this world. How does that compare to eternity? Like literally every moment in paradise is better than the moment preceding it. So if you're enjoying something, people when they eat hamburgers, they they often eat around the edges. Why do they do that? They save the juiciest part for last, right? Because they want the best for last. You wouldn't go straight to the middle and then the rest of your meal is the drier part on the side. But in Jannah, whatever you get, each bite, it tastes better in the second bite than the first. And the third bite tastes better than the second. And the fourth bite tastes better than the third, and so on. And it doesn't end, right? And this goes on for eternity. Eternity. Forever. So look at what he says. Facilitates their attaining the happiness of eternity with little effort in a short time. That is a lifetime. For there's no way of comparing that with eternity. And this is why the ulama say the person who is flagrant in their ma'asiyah, their disobedience of Allah, and just living in a way that is displeasing to Allah, and they know that they shouldn't do that, they say this is an indication of really lacking aql, really lacking intelligence. Because how can you prefer these temporary enjoyments that are followed by regret for a set number of years? How can you exchange eternity for that? If you had the offer of receiving $1 billion in return for giving up $20, of course you'd give up the $20 or whatever you were asked to give up, because whatever is being offered is far greater in value. So it's the lack of intelligence in being tied to the dunya, where a person lives their life as if there is no hereafter, as if there is no eternity. But if they truly understand eternity, they realize this is going to feel like a dream. When you die, this will feel like a dream. Now, when you're dreaming in this life, as you're in the dream state, it may feel like it's going on for a long time. But then as soon as you wake up, when the alarm goes off, you barely have fragments of memory from what you dreamt. And it seems like it was such a short thing. So when you compare what you were dreaming to your wakeful state, the dream seems like nothing. And the ulama say that likewise, when you die and you're in the grave, your level of perception in comparison to this dunya will be like waking up from a dream. And you'll look back on dunya and it'll feel like a dream just as fast. That's the reality. Levels of perception. Now, moving along, inshallah. We go to the Quran and we find that Allah Ta'ala mentions this name al-Latif in several places. We're not going to analyze all of them, but we'll look at a couple. In one verse, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says, لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار وهو اللطيف الخبير. Visions do not perceive him, while he perceives all visions, and he is the benevolent, the all-aware. Now this is not negating the fact that believers will behold Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in Jannah. What this verse is negating is idrak. Idrak is like an encompassing perception, which indicates ihata. That's impossible. So Allah is saying that visions do not encompass him, while he encompasses all visions. And he is al-Latif, al-Khabir. So we look at this verse and what Allah is saying, and why he ends the verse by mentioning these two names, al-Latif and al-Khabir. And the ulama, Imam al-Razi is noteworthy of mention. He says, commenting on this verse, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Latif in his creation and arrangement of our forms. He is Latif in his blessings and favors, Latif with his servants, praising them when they obey him, and ordering them to make tawbah when they sin. And he is Latif with his servants, never commanding them with more that they can bear, and blessing them with more than they deserve. Wallahi, we get more than we deserve. Wallahi, we get more than we deserve. And one of the things we were talking about in the khutbah today, somewhat briefly, is what it means to be an abd who has a master, a sayyid. What does the sayyid want from their abd? Does he want a lazy abd or an entitled abd who's only looking after himself and what's in it for me, where he's demanding his master as if he's entitled to receive anything? That's not the attitude of the true abd. The abd realizes that whatever his master gives him is more than he deserves. That's his relationship. We also have mention of the name al-Latif in the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. And this is a really beautiful example because this ties into how we make sense of the difficult things that happen in our own lives. In the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, at the very end of the chapter, after we've learned of all of the trials and tribulations and stages of life that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam went through, we get to the part where he's able to be reunited with his family, when they finally come to Egypt collectively. And Allah Ta'ala says, then he raised his parents to the throne, and they all fell down in prostration to Yusuf. We know that prostration is a prostration of tahiyya and ta'zeem, out of respect and greeting. He then said to his father, Ya abati, هذا تأويل رؤياي قد جعلها ربي حقا وقد أحسن بي إذ أخرجني من السجن. He says, dear father, this is the interpretation of my old dream. My Lord has made it come true. He was truly kind to me when he freed me from prison and brought you all from the desert after Shaitan had ignited rivalry between me and my siblings. And after all of that, he says, Inna Rabbi latifun lima yasha, innahu huwa al-alimul hakim. Indeed, my Lord is latif, is subtle in fulfilling what he wills. The way everything played out was so subtle. He says, indeed, my Lord is subtle in fulfilling what he wills. Surely he alone is the all-knowing, the supremely wise. What you see in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam is lutf upon lutf upon lutf at every single stage. So you look in the story, and when we talk about lutf, remember, we're not just talking about something that's always pleasant or kind. It could also be lutf that comes with a little bit of difficulty, but it's leading to something better. So Allah is leading it to you in a subtle way that you can't perceive. Because it seems difficult or negative, you don't perceive the lutf in it until you get to the next stage or later down the road. So you go to the story. The plotting of Yusuf's brothers was a subtle means of him leaving Canaan. Right? Because in order for this to all play out, he had to leave Canaan. The way his brothers plotted was very subtle and even tricky. And that was a subtle way of him even leaving the area. That's number one. He gets put into the well by his brothers. The discovery by the travelers, those who found him in the well, was a subtle means of him being rescued from what would have been certain death. It just so happened that some travelers stopped by the well. This is Allah's Latif. Look at how he was rescued in this subtle way. They didn't know what they were going to discover. He didn't know that anyone was on the way. It was very subtle. And he was taken by them, as you know, and they decided they're going to sell him for a very low price. And being sold by these travelers was a subtle means of him entering Egypt. So he gets to Egypt and he's sold. He's living in the house of Aziz. He's growing up in this house. This is a subtle way of learning how the centers of power operate. And as he's attaining maturity in the household of Aziz, we know the story of the wife of Aziz, Zulaykha, attempting to seduce him. So the trial that he was put to with the wife of Aziz trying to seduce him and the subsequent refusal and imprisonment was a subtle protection for him. And it was also a subtle means of him being able to call people to Allah, because he was calling the prisoners to Allah whilst in the prison. How otherwise would he have gone into the prison? He was brought there through the subtle means, through the rejection of Zulaykha's advances. His dream interpretation in the prison was also a subtle way of getting out of the prison and learning about the king. And his dream interpretation and his good reputation were subtle means of gaining the king's trust and being appointed over the food stores of Egypt. And his command over the food stores of Egypt was a subtle means of reuniting with his family, because the famine happened and they came to gather to collect grains. And this was the means. Him being in charge of that was a subtle means of getting them to come back and ultimately reunite the entire family. So from the very beginning of the story all the way to the end, he's seeing the lutf of Allah after everything has come to fruition. Things didn't always make sense, but they make sense completely now. And reflecting on this, he says, it's as if he's saying that this lutf of Allah encompasses everything here, and likewise encompasses the entire cosmos. Just as Allah is Latif in this story, Allah is Latif in the whole cosmos, not just our story, but other stories, everything else going on in the world, things that we don't fully understand, but we often understand after the fact. And this is something I like to repeat, because it's really common for people to have this experience where something bad happens. And I say bad between quotation marks, because when it happens, the person sees, well, this is bad, this is horrible. They don't see a way out of it. They don't want it to happen, but they can't get out of it. And they have to work through it somehow, but maybe years down the line, they see that that quote unquote bad thing led to A, which led to B, which led to C, that they would not have otherwise been led to were it not for the bad thing. And after they go to A, B, C, and D, and they look back, they realize, subhanAllah, were it not for that bad thing happening, that wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened, and that wouldn't have happened. And if none of those happened, I wouldn't actually be here in a far better situation than I would have been if the bad thing never happened in the first place. You know, we say hindsight is 2020. And we have to be able to look out for those things. You know, we're all tried in different ways. Bad things happen. We're challenged in ourselves, with our families, the world, society, job, people, money, you name it. We're tried in different ways. But it's really important to try to look back and see where you were and where you are, and find the lutf of Allah where you are now and how you got there. It's really important. And this story is basically a lesson in how bad things are not always bad. They're not fun to experience. No one necessarily enjoys them, but they end up leading to something good at the end. And what does Allah always remind us in the Quran? وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The aqiba, meaning the good end, the good end result, is for the muttaqin, the people of taqwa. You're always going to have a good end, no matter what happens, if you have taqwa. Moving along, we come now to connection, cultivation, and realization. And this is coming from the words of Shaykh Ahmed ibn Ajiba. He says, with respect to the first meaning of al-Latif, meaning the ineffable, the one beyond imperfection, you should connect to this name by seeking from Him and turning wholeheartedly to Him, asking Him to unveil to you the subtle knowledge of Him and His attributes. How do you do that? He says this is by making what is dense, meaning the material, physical, subtle, so that your spirit dominates. I mean, that right there is an entire discourse. He juxtaposes these two things. Al-Kathif wal-Latif. Al-Kathif is the dense, the material world. You know, we call them the hard sciences for a reason, because they're measuring the material. So everything in the material world we call kathif, or subtle, or gross, or material, dense, physical. He's talking about making what is kathif, what is dense, making it latif. How do you do that? It's by seeing that even in the physical, there's a spiritual meaning, if you reflect. In the physical is still ayat, pointing to the power of Allah, the creation of Allah, signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not Gnostics who have a hatred for the material of the world as such. When we talk about dunya as being cursed, we're not talking about the stuff of the world per se, you know, nature, waterfalls, these beautiful things. We're talking about the world insofar as it distracts one from God. But if a person can see the signs and everything around them, then even the dense becomes subtle because it's pointing to a higher reality. This is what he's alluding to here. Subtle so that your spirit dominates. With respect to the second meaning of al-Latif, meaning Allah's knowledge, you should connect with this name by asking Him to disclose to you what is obtruse and hidden. Not just anything that's hidden. You don't need to know people's business, right? But asking Allah to disclose to you what is hidden from you, which is relative. What's hidden to you may be obvious to others. But hidden here is referring to those things that are subtle in concerning the knowledge of Allah's names and attributes and His signs, things that, when known, will benefit you, will transform your salat and your remembrance of Him, will increase you. And with respect to the third meaning, benevolence, you should connect with this name by asking Him to bring benefit to His servants through your hands. And we could add subtly here, to bring benefit to His servants through your hands. Why should you ask Allah for this? You should ask Allah for this because the Prophet ﷺ said, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of people are those who are the most beneficial to other people. When you can be of service, when you can benefit people in whatever area of life you can benefit them, and you become indispensable to those people in helping them, you benefit in being among the best of people. Because that's a part of the nasiha we have towards our fellow Muslims, that if we have something we can benefit them with, we should try to benefit them with that thing. Now for cultivation, which is, as always, this is the hard work, he says you should cultivate this name, al-Latif, in your character by strengthening your spirituality, your ruhaniyah, and seeing to it that your humanness is spiritually subtle, so that all material objects become spiritually subtle due to the overpowering nature of you witnessing of spiritual meanings. This is basically what I was just saying earlier, that you come to look at the dense, not as just the stuff of material, but as things that point to higher realities. What is an ayah in the first place? We know ayat Qur'aniyah, but what are the ayat kawniyah? What are the cosmic signs? Why do we call the sun an ayah? Why do we call the moon an ayah? What is the meaning of ayah? An ayah is an alama. An alama is a sign, ma yushiru ila ghayrihi. It is what points to other than itself. It indicates other than itself. When you see a stop sign, Is the point of the stop sign noticing the metal that was used to make it or the color red? No. The point of the stop sign as a sign, what is it pointing to? It's pointing to a meaning that you need to take consideration of, that you should stop. So a sign is pointing to other than itself. So the sun is an ayah, the moon is an ayah. All of the signs in creation, these are ayat because they all point to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the dense physical material things can be imbued with spiritual meaning when we see that these are not just independent things on their own. No, they're actually the creation of Allah. They serve a function, and you see beyond just the material. Some of the mashayikh, they give an example to simplify this. They say, imagine you have a book. Let's figure out a book, a famous book. Who can mention a famous book by a famous author? You said Hamlet? I was thinking Romeo and Juliet. Okay, Shakespeare. Someone hands you a copy of Hamlet. Who wrote Hamlet? William Shakespeare. For some people, they see the book, they see the binding and the paper, they can smell the paper, they see the ink, but they're not reading the words. They're just holding the material form of the book. But then there are others who open the book and they read the book and they're reading these words and they're being told this story. And then there are others who open the book and they read the book, but they're so invested in the story, so engrossed by the story, that it's like they're with Hamlet in the story. Right? That's an analogy. So the world is like a book. So it's full of signs, but a lot of people are ignoring the signs. It's like the people who, when the plane takes off and they just shut the window immediately. Meanwhile, the other person is looking out and gazing at the ocean as they're leaving JFK. Just wow, it's the ocean, it's the buildings, right? They just shut it. Other people are reading the signs. They're observing these signs and what they're pointing to. Others are so engrossed in it, they just see the author of the book, the book of the cosmos, to use the analogy. That's what he's alluding to here, where the dense is now made subtle by that spiritual awareness. He says you should also cultivate this name by obtaining knowledge of the divine and his attributes, which is what we're doing here, and by rescuing the distressed, guiding the lost, mending the broken, and giving to those of straitened means. So part of that lutf is to be a beacon of guidance for people, a means of benefit for people, a solace for people, someone who helps others out, who tries to guide people, give them good advice, who mends the broken, who gives to those of straitened means. This is all a part of cultivating the meaning of Latif in character. When that becomes second nature and it arises spontaneously, you come to tahaqquq, or realization. He says, you realize this name by gaining firmness and stability in the three meanings. The three meanings: the ineffable, the all-knowing, and the benevolent. To connect with it, here he explains what ta'alluq is. He says to connect with it is to attempt. To cultivate it as a character trait is to strive and exert effort. And to realize it is to arrive and witness it directly. The same may be said with respect to all of the divine names. So you see here, he doesn't really give us a lot regarding tahaqquq for the name Latif, but he does explain very clearly what he means when he talks about those three aspects of connection, cultivation, and realization. The one that we have to focus on are number one and number two. Number three is not something you strive for. It's something that arises when Allah opens your heart to that, which is a product or a fruit of the connection and cultivation. It is something that you can't rush that. You can't bring it on by will. So cultivating it is where the work is. You have to exert effort, and realizing it is when you witness it directly. And it's important that even if we haven't attained tahaqquq, that we become people who pay attention. Paying attention in this context means as we learn the meanings of these names and we learn something about how their meanings manifest, that we become people who pay attention to how those things are manifesting at any given time around us or in the world, and to connect experiences and events with the meanings of these names as their effects are manifesting in the world. And this, when it's done, it takes effort, but eventually it becomes almost second nature. A person picks it up immediately. And if you are experiencing that and you are witnessing, for instance, a name of Jalal, you know that the way you respond to that is with brokenness, humility, turning to Allah. And if it's Jamal, it's with gratitude and with joy. So for each of them, there's a response as well. So with this, inshallah, we finish our class tonight. And we ask Allah Ta'ala by His name al-Latif to show lutf for us. There's a very beautiful dua that is a part of a dhikr. It's called the Latifiyya. And this is a dua from Shaykh Ahmad bin Mustafa al-Adawi, where he uses the name Latif and he expresses a seeking that is very beautiful. He says, Allahumma ultuf bina, have lutf upon us, benevolent kindness. Allahumma ultuf bina fima jarat bihi al-maqadir, qabla nuzuliha wa inda nuzuliha wa ba'da nuzuliha ma'a ridaka al-akbar, ridan tamma la sakhata ba'dahu abada. He says, Oh Allah, show us lutf in the decrees that are flowing in our midst. The maqadir, the decrees of Allah. And show us lutf before those decrees descend. Show us lutf when those decrees descend. And show us lutf after those decrees descend. And with your supreme rida, your supreme satisfaction and contentment, a contentment after which there is no sakhat, there's no divine displeasure whatsoever. Ameen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sure. Ya Allahumma ya latifan bi khalqih, ya aliman bi khalqih, ya khabiran bi khalqih. Ultuf bina ya latifu ya alimu ya khabir. And this is drawing from the Quran, right? Because Allah Ta'ala says, Allahu latifun bi ibadih, yarzuqu man yasha, wa huwa al-alim al-khabir. Allah provides for whomever He wills. Allah is latif with His servants. He provides for whomever He wills. Allah is all-knowing and is all-aware. Yeah, there's actually more than one. There's 3 or 4 I know of, where different mashayikh have taken the name Latif and composed these very beautiful du'as asking Allah by the name Latif for all sorts of lutf in different areas of life. Yeah.
So this is connected to Latif lima yasha. The overpowering of His plan that's from His lutf. So when you get that balance, when things go wrong, you stay balanced.
Right. And a part of the lutf is that if you're facing enemies, sometimes the victory is not so obvious, but sometimes the enemy does something themselves that plants the seeds of their own destruction. And that seed germinates for a while, and then it grows into something that envelops them, and it destroys them more than your own effort against them, right? And you see this today. You see this today. And that's a part of Allah's lutf. You know, we think Latif is a beautiful name. The manifestations of Latif are beautiful, but oftentimes a person sees some negativity or difficulty, and it's just because it hasn't fully filled out to the very end where they see the end result. Yeah. Any questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this one, dhikr of the name al-Latif is one of those that doesn't require any special idhn, any special permission, because it's a very gentle acting name in dhikr. And the mashayikh, they advise for a person to, if they wanted to do it daily, say in the morning and the evening, or even once a day, 129 times every single day. Ya Latifu, Ya Latifu, Ya Latifu, Ya Latif, like this, 129 times. If a person wants to go further than that, they can do 1,111 or 4,444. And you may be wondering, well, why not 5,000? You could do 5,000 too. The reason why they give these specific numbers has to do with these are areas of knowledge that are, how can we say? As Imam al-Shatibi says, ليس كل ما يعلم يقال وليس كل ما يقال حان وقته وليس كل ما حان وقته جاء رجاله. These are looking at the numerical value of the name Latif, right? And there's a basis for this in tafsir. It's a long conversation, but generally 129, or you could do 100 if you want to, or you could do 1,000, right? There's no set number per se. But this is advised by the mashayikh in these times. In addition to Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil or Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil, you combine those two, those are very powerful dhikrs for times of adversity. If you combine those. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Getting yourself in problems, won't actually all of the problems, other things that come with it.
I think the question depends on who's asking it, because some people would ask that question and they would ask it again and then another time, and you start to realize that maybe they are dealing with obsessive thoughts and they're trying to micromanage everything in their life and they're over questioning every little problem that arises. So for that person, I would tell them, as the saying goes in North Africa, in Morocco, ريح بالك وتعلم السباحة. Relax your mind and learn how to swim. You have to trust in Allah and take the means. You can't over obsess about everything. You do your best to figure out what went wrong and you try to do better. But you don't obsess over it to the point of thinking that you're 100% in control, right? I don't know if that's getting at what you're asking about, but does that?
I was just kind of asking because, like, many of the problems that you see are kind of follow a proper way. Like, we kind of fire first and then third, like getting the problem. And yeah, like we were saying, what's the like put in this thing, whereas like it's actually us not in the proper way.
That could also be from the lutf of Allah Ta'ala. that Allah causes someone to make those mistakes and fail over and over and over again until they learn about themselves and their way of thinking. And from that process, they become more informed about their faults and they make improvements. So that can even be from the lutf of Allah Ta'ala. It can be from the lutf of Allah Ta'ala that a person is left to their own devices and they fall into sin and they basically fall on their face because maybe they were arrogant before that. Maybe they were thinking, they have this heroic, pious self-image, and this began to breed arrogance and conceit in their heart. And maybe it's from Allah's rahmah and lutf that He left that person to their own devices. They failed miserably, fell on their face, and realized how weak they really are. And this caused them to become more humble and a better person in the long run than they would have been if they never failed in that very overt way. That's a subtle way of Allah guiding someone out of arrogance. If they And this is a sign of khudlan. It's a sign that Allah has left them to their own devices. And it's never too late because we never know what the end result is going to be for anybody. We can't just give up on the person forever, right? It may take some people some time. But in the case of a person who's outwardly seeing themselves as pious and whatever, and they start to feel conceited or arrogant about it, that could be a subtle way of Allah removing that arrogance from them by humbling them in a way that wakes them up from that fallacious self-belief. This is why Ibn Ata'illah, he famously said in his aphorisms, he says, an act of disobedience, ma'asiyah, an act of disobedience, رب معصية أورثت ذلا وانكسارا خير من طاعة أورثت عزا واستكبارا. It says, perhaps an act of disobedience that brings about brokenness and humility is better than an act of obedience that brings about arrogance and conceit. Right? These things are subtle, right? And you just look in your own life. How many people, some people can really legitimately say they were brought up in a pious household with pious ancestors and a pious upbringing, and they've just always been on the straight path, mashallah. Right? There's lots of people like that. But most people, if they're being honest with themselves, they recognize there was a stage where they're a little off the path. And they had to come to a realization that they're going to commit themselves to the deen of Allah Ta'ala and trying to be a proper Abdullah or Amatullah. In that experience, they're made better for it because it gives them an awareness of where they could be and where they are now. And this ultimately is good, right? Some people go through it for a longer period of time than others. That's the thing. You can't reduce the workings of Allah Ta'ala in the hearts of people to a formula. If you try to figure out everybody and fit them into a category and figure out some formula that will answer when is this person going to wake up, how is this person going to change or not change, you can't. Right? Allah Ta'ala, lillahi fi khalqihi shu'un. Allah has a tasarruf al-mutlaq, absolute status of managing the way things work in this world. Nothing really fits in this identifiable pattern that you can just fit everybody in. There are all sorts of strange stories like this. People who were pious that lost their way. People who lost their way and became pious later on. People who were pious their whole life and at the very end they lost it. People who never had it their whole life and at the very end they gained faith. Right? So many aspects unfolding. Because Allah's name Latif unfolds in various ways. Likewise, His name Al-Qahar and Al-Muntaqim and Al-Rafi' and Al-Khafid. So there's more than one name whose effects is manifesting in the creation. Wallahu a'lam. Hmm? Usually in realization, in this section, he describes the person who has the experiential realization of that particular name. In this part here, he says a few words about that, but more or less he explains what he's meant in all of the preceding sections when he's mentioned connection, cultivation, and realization, explaining that connect is to attempt, cultivate is to strive, and realizing it is to basically witness, experientially. Yeah. The tasbih, or doing dhikr of the name, would be connection. And the cultivation would be actually taking the meaning and what it indicates of human character and trying to live that character. And then when you combine those two and Allah gives you the opening, you attain that tahaqquk, that realization where we don't even say second nature anymore. It's just first nature. You witness the unfolding of the name and its meaning, and it's no longer associated with you, like my tasbih, my dhikr, my acts of good character that reflect the meaning of the name. It's just you are engrossed in witnessing it in how you are with people and how you see it in the world unfolding. That's what he's talking about. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.